June 6, 1944. On the British beaches of Normandy, one of the strangest weapons of the Second World War came crawling out of the surf. It was a tank, but it was carrying a carpet. Not a figure of speech, not camouflage, a real armored vehicle, grinding forward under fire, with a massive roll of reinforced matting bolted to its front. The German defenders had built the beach to kill men in predictable ways. Mines under the sand, steel obstacles in the tide, concrete walls, anti-tank ditches, machine guns aimed at the places where soldiers had to run. Then this absurd-looking tank reached the shingle, lowered its frame, and began unrolling a road. That was the secret of Hobart's Funnies. They looked ridiculous because the problem was ridiculous. The Allies were not simply trying to land soldiers on a beach. They were trying to drive an army through a machine designed to jam, burn, drown, and shred anything that touched it. And the answer was not more courage. It was a stranger kind of courage. The courage to say the battlefield itself was wrong. To German planners, the Atlantic Wall was supposed to make the invasion predictable. The defenders knew where the tide would run. They knew where the exits were. They knew tanks would sink in soft ground. Infantry would bunch up behind obstacles, and engineers would be cut down while trying to clear gaps by hand. They did not need to stop every Allied soldier. They only needed to turn the beach into a traffic jam under fire. But months before D-Day, one British commander looked at that same problem and reached a colder conclusion. If the beach was a machine, then the invasion needed machines of its own. Not normal tanks, not heroic slogans. Machines that could swim, smash, burn, bridge, blind, clear mines, carry infantry, and lay roads across ground that was never supposed to carry anything. The commander was Major General Percy Hobart, and the machines became known by a name that made them sound like a joke. Hobart's Funnies. The name was almost insulting. A Sherman tank with chains whipping the ground in front of it. A Churchill tank with a mortar so wide its bomb was nicknamed a flying dustbin. A tank that carried a bundle of sticks like some medieval siege animal. A tank with no turret, only ramps turning itself into a bridge. A tank that could float with a canvas skirt and propellers. A tank that towed flame fuel behind it like a venom sac. A tank that carried a searchlight hidden in armor, built to blind men at night. From a distance, they looked like experiments that had escaped from a workshop. Up close, they were something else. They were the Allied answer to a question the generals could not afford to answer with bodies. How do you cross a killing ground without making the infantry pay for every inch? To understand why these machines mattered, you have to begin 2 years earlier. Not in Normandy. At Dieppe, August 1942, the Canadian raid on Dieppe was supposed to test the German coastal defenses and gather experience for a future invasion. Instead, it became a warning written in wreckage. Tanks struggled on the shingle. Landing craft came under fire. Engineers trying to break through obstacles were killed before they could do their work. Infantry were trapped between the sea and concrete. Communications broke down. Units that were meant to move inland never got past the beach. The raid did not just fail. It revealed the exact shape of the future disaster. If the Allies tried to invade France with ordinary methods against a prepared coast, the beach would become a slaughterhouse before the real battle even began. That lesson haunted the planners, because Normandy would be larger than Dieppe in every possible way. More men, more ships, more objectives, more roads that had to be opened before the tide swallowed the landing schedule. More German guns waiting behind concrete, and more consequences if it failed. The problem was not simply German resistance. The problem was physics. A tank cannot fight if it is stuck in soft shingle. Infantry cannot advance if mines and wire force them into narrow lanes. A bulldozer cannot clear obstacles if the driver is exposed to machine gun fire. A bridge cannot appear by bravery. A bunker does not care how motivated a platoon is. A seawall does not move because an officer points at it on a map. This was the brutal arithmetic of amphibious war. Every obstacle delayed the next wave. Every delay created a pileup. Every pileup created a target. And every target invited artillery, mortars, machine guns, and panic. So the Allies needed something more precise than a tank assault. They needed a mechanical sequence. First, armor had to arrive with the infantry. Then mines had to be cleared. Then the soft ground had to be crossed. Then walls had to be breached. Then ditches had to be filled. Then vehicles had to move inland before the beach choked on its own success. That is what Hobart understood. The beach was not one obstacle. It was a chain. Break only one link, and the chain still held. Break the chain in order, and the German defense began to lose its shape. Hobart was not the obvious man for the job. By the time the idea took form, he had already been pushed aside once by a military establishment that found him difficult, abrasive, and too obsessed with armored warfare. He was not a smooth staff politician. He was not a comforting committee man. He was a tank thinker, And in 1943, when the invasion problem became impossible to ignore, the British Army handed him the 79th Armored Division and gave it a mission unlike any other armored division in the war. It would not behave like a normal division. It would not charge as a single fist. It would be broken apart and attached to other units, vehicle by vehicle, squadron by squadron, wherever the invasion needed a specialized answer. That sounds administrative. It was revolutionary. The 79th was not being built as a spearhead. It was being built as a toolbox. Inside workshops and training grounds across Britain, the toolbox grew stranger by the month. The duplex drive Sherman was meant to swim ashore before dropping its flotation screen and becoming a tank again. The crab flail tank spun a drum of weighted chains in front of itself, beating the ground until buried mines exploded before infantry stepped on them. The Churchill AVRE carried Royal Engineers inside armor and mounted a petard mortar that could throw a heavy demolition charge into concrete and steel. The bobbin tank laid reinforced matting across soft sand and shingle, so wheels and tracks would not dig themselves into the beach. The fashion carrier dropped a huge bundle of brushwood into ditches, turning a gap into a crossing point. The small box girder bridge layer could throw a bridge across an anti-tank ditch or help armor climb a wall. The Ark, stripped of its turret, became a ramp others could drive over. The Crocodile turned a Churchill into a flame tank for bunkers and fortified positions. The Buffalo could swim troops and supplies across waterlogged country. The Canal Defense Light used a hidden searchlight to dazzle defenders during night operations. These were not gadgets. They were answers. Every machine existed because someone had asked a specific battlefield question and refused to accept the usual answer. The usual answer was, send men forward. Hobart's answer was, send the right machine first. This is why the nickname is misleading. Funny implies eccentric. The actual principle was ruthless. Do not give the enemy the fight he prepared for. If he builds a minefield, do not walk through it. Beat it with chains. If he builds a ditch, do not stop at it. Carry a bridge. If he builds a wall, do not die beneath it. Break it with a demolition charge. If he trusts the beach to trap your vehicles, lay your own road over the beach. This was not a rejection of bravery. It was a refusal to waste it. But none of this mattered if the machines failed on the morning they were needed. And that was the terror of D-Day. By dawn, years of invention had been compressed into minutes. A landing craft door would drop. A strange tank would crawl forward. And the whole theory would either work in the surf, smoke, mines, and German fire, or it would become another wreck on the beach. For the crews inside Hobart's machines, the danger was not abstract. A flail tank had to move slowly enough for its chains to detonate mines, but not so slowly that it became an easy target. An AVRE had to get close enough to a bunker or wall for its short-range mortar to matter. A bobbin tank had to lay its mat straight enough for other vehicles to use, even as shells kicked sand around it. A DD tank had to survive the water before it could even begin fighting on land. And every one of these machines had a terrible flaw. It was specialized, that was its strength. It was also its vulnerability. A normal tank could improvise. A flail tank without its flail was just a tank in the wrong place. A bobbin that lost its mat failed the vehicles behind it. A bridge layer destroyed at the ditch turned a whole column into a stationary target. A swimming tank swamped by waves became a coffin before it fired a shot. The beach had no patience for cleverness. It tested every idea with steel and water. Nowhere was that more brutally clear than Omaha, where many of the American DD tanks launched into rough seas never reached the shore. The lesson was not simple, and it was not fair to reduce Omaha to one missing machine or one wrong choice. Omaha was a catastrophe of terrain, weather, current, defenses, timing, and fire. But the site was still a warning. When armored support vanished, infantry had to solve the beach with their own bodies, and that was exactly what Hobart's entire system had been designed to prevent. On the Commonwealth beaches, the Funnies did not make the landings easy. Nothing could. Men still died. Vehicles still burned. Mines still detonated. Plans still broke apart in the smoke. Some machines drowned. Some lost their crews. Some never reached the job they had been built to do, but enough of them worked. And that changed the shape of the battle. At Sword, Juno, and Gold, the invasion did not depend only on infantry crossing open beach while engineers crawled forward with handheld explosives. The first waves brought armored problem solvers with them. A crab would lumber forward, its chains whipping the sand into violent fountains. Each explosion in front of it was a mine that did not take a foot, a leg, or a life behind it. An AVRE would crawl toward a concrete position, its crew shut inside the cramped Churchill hull, then fire the petard. The demolition bomb did not need elegance, it needed force. It struck like a blunt answer to a concrete question. A bobbin would unroll its matting across ground that had been designed to swallow vehicles. Behind it, wheels and tracks suddenly had a path. A bridge layer would nose toward a ditch or wall, lower steel across the gap, and make the obstacle disappear for the column behind it. A fashion carrier would drop its great bundle into a crater or trench, turning absence into ground. This was the hidden genius of the Funnies. They did not defeat the Atlantic Wall by being stronger than it in one dramatic duel. They defeated it by making pieces of it irrelevant. One after another: minefield, lane, wall, ditch, bunker, soft ground, traffic jam. Every solved problem made the next one less deadly. Every open gap let more armor, engineers, guns, and supplies move off the beach. And once the beach stopped being a trap, the German defensive plan began to lose its power. Because a beach defense is not built to fight forever. It is built to delay. It is built to freeze the attacker at the most exposed possible moment. It is built to turn minutes into casualties. Hobart's machines stole minutes back. That was their real weapon. Not the flame, not the mortar, not the chains. Time. Imagine the German view from a bunker above the sand. For months you have been told what the invasion will look like. Landing craft, infantry, tanks, engineers. You know the rhythm. You know the obstacles. You know the killing lanes. Then the tide brings machines your plan does not understand. One tank is beating the earth with chains. Another is laying a road. Another fires a demolition bomb the size of a barrel. Another drops a bridge where no bridge should exist. Another crawls into a ditch and becomes the crossing. This is not a battle in the way you rehearsed it. It is the systematic removal of the battlefield you were counting on. That is why the Funnies mattered. They attacked the German expectation. They did not merely support the infantry. They changed what the infantry was being asked to do. A soldier stepping off a landing craft still needed courage. He still faced fire, fear, noise, confusion, and death. But there is a profound difference between courage used to cross a prepared death lane and courage used to exploit a gap a machine has just opened. Hobart's system did not eliminate danger. It changed the price of movement. And the strangest part is that this system grew out of a military culture that had often resisted strange ideas. Armies like standardization. They like equipment that fits supply tables. They like manuals. They like machines that do the job printed next to their name. Hobart's Funnies were a direct insult to that instinct. They asked an armored division to stop thinking of a tank as a tank. A tank could be a mine clearer. A tank could be a bridge. A tank could be a demolition team. A tank could be a road layer. A tank could be a searchlight. A tank could be a flamethrower. A tank could be a boat, at least for long enough to reach land. The machine's official category mattered less than the obstacle it could defeat. That was the cultural break. And it is why Hobart's contribution was not just mechanical. It was intellectual. He helped force the Allied army to ask a different question. Not, what weapons do we have, but what problem must disappear before the soldier gets there? That question would outlive the beaches. After Normandy, the specialized armor of the 79th kept appearing wherever Europe presented another ugly obstacle. Ports, fortified towns, flooded ground, river crossings, bunkers, mud, canals. The Crocodile became one of the most feared bunker-clearing vehicles in Northwest Europe. Not because it was subtle, but because fortified troops understood what it meant when flame reached a position that had been safe from bullets. The Buffalo carried men and supplies through water and mud where trucks could not move. Bridge layers and ramp carriers turned broken terrain into routes. The Canal Defense Light, guarded in secrecy, offered a way to light and blind the night battlefield. By the end of the campaign, the logic had become clear. Modern war was not only a contest between weapons, it was a contest between systems. The side that treated every obstacle as an isolated crisis would bleed at each one. The side that treated obstacles as predictable engineering problems could build a method for surviving them. This does not mean the Funnies were perfect. They were not. Some were awkward, some were unreliable, some required training that ordinary units did not have. Some were so specialized that moving and maintaining them created a headache before they ever reached combat. The machines could not save every man. They could not guarantee success. They could not turn war into mathematics. But they did something deeply important. They proved that the obvious fight is not always the necessary fight. And that is the same military paradox that appears again and again in the best Allied operations of 1944. The commander who looks aggressive on the map is often the one who has quietly refused the frontal slaughter. The unit that seems to hit hardest may be the unit that spent the most effort, making sure its infantry did not have to hit first. The machine that looks absurd may be the only serious answer in the room. That is the real reason the name Hobart's Funnies has survived. Not because the vehicles were amusing, But because the name preserves the shock of seeing war solved by things that did not look like war was supposed to look. A carpet on a tank, chains beating mines, a bridge carried into battle, a searchlight behind armor, a floating Sherman in the Gray Channel, a Churchill that became a ramp, a bundle of sticks dropped into a ditch while shells fell around it. These images seem strange because they belong to a category of courage we do not celebrate enough. The courage to be practical, the courage to look at a heroic plan and ask how many men it will cost. The courage to admit that a battlefield can be redesigned. The courage to make the enemy's strongest preparation irrelevant. On D-Day, the German defenders did not face just soldiers coming out of the sea. They faced a workshop that had gone to war. They faced engineers in armor. They faced machines built from the memory of Dieppe and the fear of repeating it. They faced an army that had learned one of the hardest truths in combat. Sometimes the bravest thing a commander can do is refuse to ask for bravery in the first place. The tank with the carpet was not funny. It was a warning. The beach was still deadly, but it was no longer allowed to decide the shape of the battle.